Assembly Member Borth.
Sir Howard, could you tell me how many domestic destinations will be served by Heathrow by 2030?
No.
None whatsoever? No.
Sorry, no, I can't tell you the answer to that because what we have... Sorry, you're puzzled.
Well, I'm puzzled because I thought that's why we spent all this money on your commission to find no answers like that.
Oh, I'm sorry to have disappointed you.
Well, you know, how many? I mean, surely we're looking at Heathrow. You were looking at Heathrow as the strategic answer to some problems with air travel for the UK. Surely you must know how many domestic destinations we are likely to be served by 2030. There must have been some kind of planning.
Yes, I mean, the report shows that the number of domestic destinations served by Heathrow has been in decline for a considerable period of time. And the reason for that is that in a constrained airport, there is a natural tendency, it's the airlines that do this, of course, to replace short, thin routes with long, fat routes, if they possibly can, because that generates more business for them and indeed for the airport. So what you've seen is a reduction in the number of destinations. We think that if nothing is done, that reduction will continue. And that there are currently 7 destinations, and it seems likely that that would decline to perhaps 4 destinations in the future. Now, some of this, of course, is understandable, and indeed some of it's positive. You know, if you have faster, better trains, then to some extent that will take away traffic from the airlines, and that's on the whole, I would say, a good thing. So, you know, you have to be careful about distinguishing. So the ones that you've lost where people are very steamed up is, say, Inverness. I went to Inverness as part of this work. They lost their connection into Heathrow in the late 90s, and that's very unfortunate for them because they're attracting American tourists to go to Inverness, and they can't fly direct to Inverness, they can't get transfer. So that's significant. Some of the others, perhaps Liverpool, maybe you would regard as perhaps somewhat less significant given the improvements in the West Coast train service that there be. What we have said is that in an expanded Heathrow, the government should use public service obligations in a different way and in a more active way than it has done in the past, in order to require and incentivise the maintenance of important domestic routes. That's why I can't answer your question as to how many there will be, because I don't know whether the government will accept that recommendation, and if it does, how much it will do. They have started to do that, so there are new routes from Dundee to Stansted and from Newquay to Gatwick, is it, I think, which are supported as public service obligations just in the last 6 months or so. So policy is moving in this area in favour of a more activist approach to the PSO possibility, with modest amounts of government support available to incubate new routes. So we would argue that the government should use that ability and should incentivise important regional routes into Heathrow. Inverness would be, an obvious one. There used to be a route. Some of the northeast airports similarly. Belfast will probably keep its connections anyway, I would think, because the amount of traffic is sufficient. But we would certainly argue that if you don't do anything active, then the likelihood is that domestic connectivity into Heathrow will diminish.
Could you tell me what contact you've had with the European Union as to whether or not those remodelled public service obligations would be state subsidy of private companies and therefore illegal?
We note that the government have already put in place a scheme, and as I mentioned, there are already 2 examples of how it has been done, and that has not been challenged by the European Commission. So we do not believe, and we've taken legal advice on it, that the PSO scheme that we propose would be challenged.
So you have taken legal advice?
We've taken legal advice on it, yes. It's not easy to go and see the Commission and say, is this going to be okay, when you don't precisely know what it's going to be, but our belief is that this would be acceptable.
Yeah. But with expanded public service obligations, does that not mean that you're effectively reducing the number of slots for Heathrow to become profitable?
Well, it is profitable.
But if you increase the number of public service, airlines take up spaces and slots, and if you're increasing the number of public service obligations, you're reducing effectively the revenue stream for Heathrow from those profitable airlines. Is that not? I mean,
the PSO,
quite simple on that.
The PSO scheme involves a small government subsidy which goes to the airline.
It goes to the airlines, and the airlines continue to pay exactly the same per passenger charge to Heathrow that they would whether there was a PSO in place or not. So it has relatively little impact, and Heathrow Airport Limited is currently consulting, because it recognises the value of domestic routes, on slightly reduced per passenger charges for domestic services. So it clearly sees that it can take forward interventions of this kind and still be a profitable business.
So
I mean, at the margin, you could say, if you just look at one flight in isolation, you could say, well, okay, the landing charge is the same, but maybe those passengers spend less in the shops or whatever. But of course, a lot of those connecting passengers, and the reason that places like Inverness want this route is mainly because they want to attract passengers who are connecting onto other flights as well. So you are getting a second benefit of the passenger coming in and then going out. So it actually is very difficult to say whether a route of a smaller plane for a UK domestic would increase or reduce the overall profitability of the airport. And certainly Heathrow themselves believe that a larger domestic network, encouraged in some way, would actually be beneficial overall for the airport. I mean, I can't judge that, but I think the impact would be probably quite marginal either way.
What's the cost to the British taxpayer of these PSOs? Have you modelled how much it's going to cost the taxpayer to subsidise these firms?
At the moment, the government has a fund available of 12 million.
I thought it was
20 million pounds.
It hasn't been close to being totally.
The Chancellor put in place a fund in the budget of 2014, I recall, of £20 million, which was available to promote routes from regions into the London airport system. And at the moment, that is significantly underspent. I believe only about £2.5 million of it has been spent on 2 routes, one from Dundee to Stansted, the other from Newquay to Gatwick. Now, what airlines will say to us is there would be much more demand if there was scope, if there was capacity at Heathrow, because a lot of the demand from these airports would be demand from connecting passengers. So, the 20 million is available and is currently significantly underspent. But I can't give you a precise figure, Mr. Bob, because I don't know, but that's the sort of territory we're in.
And indeed, the PSO obligation, the public service obligation, and the support funding are separate things. And it may be, at an airport that is as profitable as Heathrow, that the PSO obligation in itself is sufficient to see the domestic route safeguarded.
So, Fascinating though it is knowing what the cost of the PSOs are now, I'd rather not want to know what the cost of PSOs are going to be at 2030 when we've massively expanded them, as you've indicated in your report.
Well, I think that it would be small. As Philip said, if you require it, it may happen without any subsidy. So PSO is one thing, the obligation to provide a route. And then if you can't get an airline to do it except with a subsidy, then the subsidy is available currently within this £20 million. But I can't believe that this would be very expensive, actually. But I can't give you an absolute number because I don't know how many applications there would be. And that would be for the government to decide how many obligations it wished to impose on the airport.
But how many routes are you recommending it would be expanded to? You're currently talking about 7 now. It's declined, I understand, over the past few, as you've indicated, yes, over the past few years, and set to decline even more. Where are you aiming to increase that to?
We haven't made a detailed recommendation because that would depend on the profile of demand and what the airlines think. I'm afraid we didn't think it was sensible to try to model now what the regional network would look like in 2026 or 27.
Yeah. Well, I thought what you were trying to do was model exactly that, of what the situation's going to be.
Well, we said what would happen if nothing happened, if you didn't do anything, and we believed that the number of domestic connections would fall. So what we then said was, well, that would be not very attractive, therefore you should put in place a system to try to increase that. But that would then be, on a place-by-place basis, in negotiation between an airline and the other airport and Heathrow, to do that. And we have not done the detail of that because that would be infeasible now at 10 years' distance.
Okay, so you started off the session telling me that you don't know how many it's going to decline to.
Well, we did say, I didn't say that, actually.
Oh, right.
We said that we think it's declining to 4. That's what we think, is declining to 4. What you asked me is how many routes there were going to be. And I said I couldn't answer that because I don't know how many PSOs there will be and how much support for them.
So we don't know how many there are going to be. We can't predict how many they're going to be, and we don't know how much they're going to cost the British taxpayer, which is a summary of what you just said to me.
Well, it's a pejorative summary of what I've said. What I've said is we have produced an imaginative scheme, I think, which will go down very well in the regions. You might find this in London, but I have spent quite a bit of time travelling around the regions. This is an issue which they are very keen about in Belfast, in Aberdeen, in Inverness, and in other places that I have visited. And I think, therefore, to ridicule this is a very unappealing thing to do, if I might say so. Because there are a lot of people in the regions who believe that access to Heathrow is very important for them in terms of attracting business, attracting inward investment, attracting tourists. And therefore, what we've tried to do in this is to produce a scheme which we believe would work and which Heathrow, in fact, themselves are prepared to collaborate with. But what I can't do is, if you turn this into a sort of legalistic argument and say precisely how much and precisely how much it will cost, I can't answer that question. Okay. But what I can say is that I think we've produced a scheme which I think London could be positive about, saying that we recognise that London's a national asset with its connectivity, that we need to make sure that that national asset is made available to other parts of the country, which it could be decisive in influencing inward investment and inward tourism. And just to sort of sneer at it, I think is inappropriate, if I may say so.
I'm not sneering. I'm not sneering. I think the regional airports accessed, and Scotland wants to access a hub. Wales wants to access a hub. Northern Ireland wants to access a hub. But what you're telling me is that the airports, the third runway solution isn't the answer.
Yes, I am telling you that it is the answer.
And we're going to have to rely on PSOs in public service.
I'm precisely telling you that it's the answer.
You can make no predictions of how many you're going to have. You can't say how much it's going to decline to. And actually what they want in the regions is answers, not more questions. But thank you anyway. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.